talk about free will. This is probably the most important subject, most fundamental subject in the whole spiritual arena, if you like, defining characteristic of the human being. So it pays to understand this in depth. And I'll try to make it as clear as I can. Please feel free to ask questions, but give me a chance first to build a picture of the subject, and I'm very happy to answer if I can. Hard subject to understand. First of all, we live in a world where free will is really being denied. You know that we live at a time when the pendulum is swinging towards a position that understands that humans are really just mechanical systems, animal, biological systems, and we don't really have a spiritual component, and therefore all our acts are really simply outputs due to the inputs, biochemical, genetic, and so forth. That makes it difficult. And secondly, it's a very deeply mysterious and mystical subject. So not easy to understand. But let's see if we can try and get a feel for this subject. First of all, I'm sure you're aware, you should be aware, that the central defining characteristic of the human being is free will. The way the Torah puts it is that it says that the human is created in a divine image, right? We call that Tselem Elokim. That means that the human being is created in an image of God. And the Kabbalists ask the question, what does the image of God mean? I mean, do we look like God? What does the image of God mean? And the deepest understanding we have of the image of God is free will, meaning that He's free and we are free. God does whatever He wants, right? Completely unconstrained. Nothing forces Him to do anything at all. And similarly, He creates us free. In other words, if you make a picture of the spiritual system, you have, let's say, God as the point of origin, and then many worlds devolving from Him down to the material world. And humans are pitched at exactly that position that reflects Him. In other words, God is free and we are free. There's nothing else in the universe that is free. Nothing below us, no animal, no molecule, no planet, nothing material has free will. Never moves, no cockroach, no alley cat, no molecule, nothing ever moves out of its rules, program rules. And above us, angelic beings don't have free will either. Angels are too high and animals are too low, right? Angels have free will like you have free will to walk into a fire. Do you have free will to step into a fire?
Yes.
Yes. Well, technically speaking, you could, but you wouldn't, right? You see the result. Do you have free will to jump off a tall building?
Yes.
You could, but you see yourself becoming part of the scenery, right? So clearly that you wouldn't do it, right? An angel sees so clearly that moving a hair's breadth out of line, out of the definition of what he's sent to do, would mean disappearance. So he doesn't have free will. And below us, the animals don't have free will either, because an animal sees only the immediate sensual, material reality, and therefore an animal doesn't have free will. So amazingly, we are pitched exactly at the interface between the spiritual world above us and an animal world below. We feel the pull of the angelic and the spiritual and the noble. We feel the pull of the earthy and the material and the sensual, and in that zone of tension we operate. And that's why humans are unique. We occupy exactly that zone that has free will because we can respond to both. There's a very beautiful expression of this. The Medrash says, the Torah says that when God created a human being, He started with the words, Na'aseh Adam. Let us create the human. What's wrong with that phrase? Let us create man.
It's just us.
Who's us? If there's one thing we focused on in Judaism, it is that God is one. So why would He express Himself as us? And there are many expressions, but one very beautiful one is this. The Medrash says that when God created the human being, He consulted the angels who would construct, put every value, character trait into man. In other words, He consulted charity and truth and justice, right? All the characteristics that would make the human being. Some said don't create man, and some said do. Some said do. Truth said, right? Truth said do not create man and be full of lies. Charity, Tzedakah said create man, he'll give charity. And while these forces became locked in a cosmic, unresolvable argument, while they were arguing, God created the human being. The wrong way to understand that statement is that since they couldn't resolve the issue, God ignored them and created the human being. The right way is this. He asked for their advice and He took it. What was their advice? An incredible cosmic unresolved argument, and that's what He created. Right? Isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
And that's what the human being is. An amazing unresolved argument between motivations, right? You feel pulled in one direction, spiritual, to do what's right. You feel pulled in another direction, take chances, do something perhaps a little immoral. I know, not you, but normal people, not JSL students. But like normal people, sometimes tempted to do something that is wrong. And in that zone of tension, when you feel both pulls, that's what gives you free will. But more important than that, I think, is this, that our free will is extremely limited. Now this is worth tremendous clarity, getting this clear. Our free will is very limited. I would say horizontally and vertically. Right? Horizontally, I mean that if you look at all the areas of your life, your marital situation, your finances, your health, your academic situation, right? All areas of your life, Jewish teaching is that you're free in only one area. There's only one zone in which you operate that you have free will. Where would you say that is? The only zone you have free will is in the moral or ethical zone. Only in the battle between your higher self and your lower self, right? Your higher self meaning the side of you that responds to the conscience and the spiritual and doing what's right. The lower self that responds to the childish, the immature, the sensual. Only in that zone do you have free will, right? For example, let's take money. So it's axiomatic in Jewish thinking that your money is predetermined. You cannot earn 1 cent more than is predetermined the first day of Rosh Hashanah every year. First morning of Rosh Hashanah is predetermined. The last cent you will earn that year. And there's nothing you can do that will earn you 1 cent more than that. And I don't think you need me to tell you this. If you look around the world, you'll see people who are really smart, well educated, make all the right decisions, never earn any money. And others who are total idiots and very rich. I happen to know a few in that category, I can assure you. You don't need to be smart or clever to earn money. You know, I saw an interview with a Canadian Jew called Mr. Brunford. Any Canadians here? Canadians? He's a fabulously wealthy billionaire candidate. In the interview they said, how did you become so rich? And he said, when I was 10 years old, I bought an apple for 1 cent, and I sold it for 2 cents. Then I bought 2 apples, and I sold them for 4 cents. Then I bought a box of apples and sold them for $1. Then my grandfather died and left me $61 million. And that's how I became rich. And I think that's an authentic Jewish perspective. In other words, you make your effort, but not necessarily connected to the result. So money really is not in your free will. You can damage yourself financially without limit. There's no limit to how you can ruin yourself financially. And the reason is that's an immoral thing to do. Failure of character. Right? In Judaism, you have an obligation to take care of your finances and your assets. And there's no limit to what a mess you can make of yourself financially. But you cannot guarantee income no matter what you do. Take health, for example, right? I happen to be a doctor, but you don't need to be a doctor to know that you cannot control your health. You can do exactly all the right health moves, the right diet, exercise, and become disastrously ill. It happens all the time. You can mess up your health without limit. You could kill yourself. There's no limit to how much you can damage your health. That's an immoral thing to do, right? It's a Torah transgression to damage your health. But no matter what you do, you cannot guarantee health. Also, you cannot guarantee how long you live. Right? According to Kabbalistic thinking, you're born with a case. That means when you're born, there's a certain hair's breadth endpoint that you cannot live beyond. We never know what that is, so it makes no practical difference. But nothing you do can give you 1 second of life longer than you were destined to live. You can lose it, you can kill yourself, you can do very unhealthy stuff, you can do spiritually unhealthy and lose life. And once you've lost life, you can add life back with certain mitzvahs by doing tshuva, but you can never live longer than the time you were given. That's not amenable to free will. Many other areas. Let's say choosing a suitable marriage victim. I mean a marriage partner, right? Choosing a marriage partner. You know, there are limits to the amount of people you can meet. A young man cannot possibly explore a relationship with every woman on earth, even though many young men seriously try. Besides, there's limits to the opportunities that are presented to you, and therefore, when it comes to health, finances, right, opportunities, we do not believe that you have free will in those areas. You have free will in terms of how you handle those areas. The moral approach you take to those situations. How do you deal with what's given to you in life? That's where you have free will. And therefore, when we talk about bechira, which means freedom of will, we're talking about the moral, spiritual, inner battle, that mortal battle between your higher self and your lower self. That's what we mean when we talk about free will. We're also not talking about technical choices, when you choose which flavor of dessert you're going to eat, or which pair of socks you're going to wear in the morning. Like animals also make selections like that. Machines can be programmed to make selections, right? That's not what we mean when we talk about free will. We're talking about the moral challenges. That's what you created for. But more important is that on a vertical scale, your free will is limited. And this is an absolutely classic idea, probably the most classic idea in all of Jewish philosophical thinking of this kind. And that is on a vertical scale, your freedom of will is limited. Now, this is worth tremendous concentration. For example, imagine a vertical scale. Let's take an area like stealing, right? Take theft. So there's a vertical scale of refinement. On the bottom is a person who hangs out on the street, violently mugging little old ladies. That's what he does. Hits them on the head with a brick, takes their money, runs off down the street, right? Where's that person's freedom of will being expressed? That the next time he attacks a little old lady on the street, if he decides that instead of killing her, he's only going to crack her skull, he has made a tremendous moral advance. When that person dies and goes up to the next world, he's going to be spiritually rewarded for that. Why is he operating down there? We have to think about that, but he is. When you die, any of you, and you go up to the next world and God says, what did you achieve on earth? And you say, God, I never hit any little ladies over the head with a brick. You think he's going to say, shkech, amazing, wow. No. Look, I don't know you personally, but I presume that most days you're not out on the street. Most days. Okay. And therefore, that's not where you're operating, but that's where he's operating. You are being tested, you're expressing your free will at your level of refinement. This is very scary. This means that everyone sitting in this room right now is guilty of stealing. So you're thinking to yourself, what does he mean? I don't break into people's houses at night with a black mask and I mean at your level. For example, who in this room has ever had a job working for someone else? Okay, you're sitting there at work, and while you're working, you make a private phone call. 2 counts of stealing against you. Your employer pays for the call, and the 10 minutes you spend speaking to your mother, you're being paid a salary to work. What do you mean you don't steal? You mean you don't hit the little ladies over the head with a brick, but that's not where you're being judged. If you work in a place where it's tacitly accepted that you can make occasional calls, that's fine. But how about long distance? How about 20 minutes on the phone? How about coming a little late to work or leaving a little early? That's stealing, and there's no limit. You know that? Do you know that every word you say has a Jewish standard? Every word you say. There's no limit to the refinement. Every word you say has to be completely true, completely kind, and completely necessary. Anyone here who can say that every word they ever say is completely true, completely kind, completely necessary? But if you're operating at that level, that's where you're being judged. And there's no limit. Take, for example, theft. You have a thing called Gnevas Das. Gnevas Das means that if you mislead someone, let's say you say something to somebody that's not true, and you don't harm them at all, but it's untrue. It's called theft of the mind. You're sitting down to dinner. You have an expensive bottle of wine you're about to open with your dinner. Unexpectedly, a friend of yours walks in. So you say to your friend, you know what, I'm going to open this wine in your honor. You're lying through your teeth. You didn't do him any harm, on the contrary, you honored him. But it's a Torah transgression, there's theft of the mind. You visit someone in hospital, and on your way out, you see someone else who's ill that you didn't realize was sick. So you walk into the room and you say to them, I came specially to visit you. You're lying. There's a mitzvah as well, that's a different story. But there's a Torah transgression because it's called theft of the mind. Right? Now that's way more refined than mugging people on the street and taking their money. But if you're a refined person operating at this level, that's where you're being judged. Can I give you a homework exercise? Homework exercise?
Yes.
Here's a halachic problem to solve. For every correct answer, Jackie's going to buy you a whiskey. Or cocaine, whatever you're into. Here's a true incident. A fellow walked into a bank. This question was put to one of the great rabbis some time ago. A fellow walked into a bank in New York, and he said to the manager, I'd like to take out a bank loan. So the manager said, okay, how much do you want? The guy said, I want $200. I'm going abroad for 3 months. I want $200. The manager said, are you serious? That's a tiny loan. You're going to pay 20% interest. Is this for real? The guy said, yeah, that's what you advertise loans. So they started filling out the forms. When they got to collateral, the manager said to him, what are you going to leave us as security? The guy said, I'm going abroad. I don't need my car. It's outside in your parking lot. Here are the keys. Impound the car. It's worth a great deal more than $200. If I fail to pay the loan, you sell the car. Manager said, fine. And true enough, the guy went overseas, came back 3 months later, walked into the bank, paid $240 and left. Manager called him back and said, what was it all about? What did it all mean? The guy said, where else could I get parking for $40 for 3 months? The question is that Gnevas Das? Is that deception or not? On the one hand, total deception. On the other hand, he took a loan, he paid interest, he left value. But that moral question that you have to think about is a question at this level of refinement. If you told the story to a fellow down there mugging people on the street, he'd think it was too wonderful. So why did I think of that? Do you understand?
Yeah.
You are being held accountable, and the person who's grappling with that moral issue is punished more severely spiritually for that fault than he is for his violence. Because the higher you are, the more you are being judged at your level of refinement. Right? And that's where your test is, and therefore you cannot compare yourself to anybody else. Do you know that, for example, in a Jewish school, we never read out grades in a classroom? Because when the teacher reads out the grades on a test, and one kid got a better grade, another kid got less, the second kid feels like a failure, but maybe he tried harder. Maybe he did better in terms of his effort and his capacity than the other child. Do you understand? We can't, of course, when children are 15 and 16 and 17, you can be brutally unfair. Because life's unfair, they have to learn. But not when they're 7 years old and don't understand that. The Talmud says that when you die, you are not compared to anyone else. The Talmud says when you die, you live permanently. You never see anyone else in that world. Actually, it's not 100% true, because husband and wife are permanently bonded into each other forever. It's good news for some of us, a little distressing for others, but that just means you better marry somebody you like, okay? Because you know you're going to be stuck with them for a long time. But the point is that what you see in that world is who you are, stripped of all illusion and facade, and what you could have been. Your ecstasy is how much of yourself you constructed, and your agony is how much you could have done and did not do. But you don't see anybody else. That's irrelevant to you. What's relevant to you is what your potential was. And that's the level of judgment, right, that is made about you. And this is perfectly logical, no? Right? Logical? Yes? No? The standard you have to live up to is the standard of your own challenge, and that is where you either succeed or fail. A fundamental question you have to ask at this point is, why is your level where it's at? Why is this fellow working on mugging people on the street a little less violently, and you working on something much more refined? And the answer is, it might not be your fault, but it's somebody's fault. And this is very scary. Very scary. Right? That fellow may be operating down there, and it may be someone else. For example, imagine a man talking to his friend on the phone. His 4-year-old son playing under the table. Man says to his friend, well, it's not 100% accurate, but let it go. Little boy hears his father say, you can take liberties with the truth. And with that distortion, he founds all his friendships and all his marriage and all his business activities. And for all of those transgressions and distortions for the rest of his life, the father takes the rap. The father's punished spiritually, because that's where the distortion was made. Is this scary? I'll give you an example. You know, it says that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur every year, the books of the living and the dead are opened. Right? Beginning of the year, all souls are judged, including those who died. So the Kabbalists ask an obvious question. Why would God judge the souls of people who died? By definition, they couldn't be any different than they were the year before, right? Imagine a person who lives. A person has a life, right? They're born here, they die at this point. So they get judged spiritually. A year later, Hashem, God judges them again. A year later, He judges them again. Why? By definition, they can't be any different there than they were here. They've been dead. They've got nobody with which to operate.
Could you say that maybe they, you know, some people on the living people said Kaddish for them or Bajil or
Absolutely. But it goes further than that. Stay with us. Yeah.
I think those lives that they influence.
Absolutely. So here's how it works. Imagine during this year, the person's been dead. No mitzvahs, no transgressions, nothing good, just coasting with the momentum they built up. But during this year, many things have happened that are the consequences of something they did back here when they were alive, that only now are playing themselves out. Back here, the person had a child. The child had children. The children had children. Now there's 3,768 great-great-grandchildren, and all that all of them are doing accrues to the credit of the person who began the process. Is this scary?
Yeah.
You do something in the world and it ripples on and amplifies. If it's good, you get the credit. To the extent, and if it's bad, of course, you get the payment. To the extent that it's momentum that you generated in the world. If you bring up a child, right? Imagine you bring up a child morally privileged, especially sensitive, Jewishly educated, and the child operates at this level. Kid gets no reward. You do. The child only gets spiritual reward for increasing what it is that they do at their level of challenge. Now, if you bring a child into the world abused spiritually, morally abused, Jewishly uneducated, morally uneducated, the child begins at that level. He doesn't get punished for that. You do, for damaging the world like that. The child is only rewarded and punished, so to speak, for the improvement, the damage or success that he makes at his level of challenge. And sometimes you see a person do an action and you see a dribble. I'll give you an example. One year in South Africa, I met a man, a Hasidic Jew from Brooklyn, who came to buy diamonds in South Africa. And this is a personal story. I'm telling you a first-hand story. This man's mother was pregnant in the Warsaw ghetto, just before the Germans killed everybody. Been to Poland? Just before all the Jews were killed, she was pregnant and she needed to see a doctor. She managed to escape from the ghetto and she went to see a lady doctor, a Christian, a Catholic woman from the old Polish aristocracy, a gynecologist in the city of Warsaw. This Christian woman treated a Jewish patient, and when she was about to leave the office, the doctor said to her, if you go back into the ghetto, do you know what's going to happen to you? So she said yes. So she said, come and stay with me. So the Jewish woman said, but I can't leave my husband. So she said, bring him too. So she said, but I can't leave my family. So she said, bring him as well. So the woman went back into the ghetto and told her husband that this Christian lady was offering to save their lives. And the husband said, but I can't leave my family. So they took them as well. And they arrived at her house with 13 people. She put them in the attic of her home for 22 months, including a time during which the German Gestapo occupied the house. And under the noses of the Germans, she kept them fed and clean. There was no bathroom up there. There was no water and no food. She fed them every day and carried away their waste with her own hands. And all 13 of them survived, despite the Germans being there. 22 months later, she managed to get them out. All 13 survived. They crossed the border. All 13 ended up in New York City. About 10 years ago in New York, there was a wedding of one of the grandchildren of one of those 13 people. And in that wedding in New York, there were 200 people present, descended from the 13 people that she saved 75 years before.
Oh, wow.
Children, grandchildren, and they went back to Poland and they found her. Old lady. They brought her to be present at a Jewish wedding to see 200 people dancing around her. There were 3 generations coming out of the people that she saved. And during the meal, someone walked up to her and they said to her, why did you risk your life to save Jews? She drew herself up and she said, because I read the Bible. I saw in Genesis that when God was about to wipe out Sodom, Abraham negotiated with God. And he said, if you can find 50 righteous people, then will you save the city? And God said yes. 45 righteous people, and God said yes. And she said, and I hope there were enough of us to save Poland. And I was wrong. Now that is something to envy because they all her children, and the children's children are her children. 4 years ago in Connecticut, I told the story, and a fellow got up at the back and he said, I'm a grandchild, I was at that wedding.
Wow.
So you do an action, and it ripples on in the world, and it goes on and on and on, and it's yours. Right? That's the way it works. And therefore, you can't judge a person in terms of where they're at. You can only judge them in terms of how they're coping with where it is that they operate. Right? That is the concept. That's called Nekudat HaBechira, Nekudat HaBechira, the point of free will. That's where the conflict is being felt. Above that, there's no conflict. When you're operating this moral level, above it and below it. Below this are things that are so vulgar and crude that you don't have to deal with them. You wouldn't. Rav Dessler, who teaches this subject, says that all of you sitting in this room right now are being rewarded spiritually for not running into the street and stabbing people to death. How much reward? Very little. I mean, again, I don't know you personally, but I presume the temptation to do that is minor. So for coping with things below your level, there's no growth and no reward. And failing things above your level, right, is really no failure. You're not operating there, right? Does anyone here play tennis? Tennis? Tennis is meaningful only against an opponent who's more or less on your level. That's tennis, right? If you play somebody weaker than you, let's say you're a good club player, and one day you walk out on the court and you find you're challenged by a 3-year-old. Kid walks out with his diaper and his racket, right? Okay. So let's say you play and you win, right? Is that tennis? No. Your name goes up, but on the other hand, let's say you play the world champion, and during the entire match you never see the ball once. Would you go home and tell your mum you lost? No, you didn't lose. You didn't play. That's not tennis. Is that clear? When you lose to an opponent way above you, there's no failure in it. And when you're victorious over somebody way beneath you, right? A warrior whose skills are far beneath yours, there's no victory there. Yeah.
So my question is, but usually historically, from what I've learned, is that if you play sports and someone is better than you, significantly better than you, for example, you do learn, even though you lose, you
Absolutely.
do learn big things.
Absolutely.
And incorporate
Yes.
it into your practice.
That's right. So let's say you're operating at this level, and you play somebody better than you, right? And you stretch and you grow. That's excellent. But if you lose, you're not held accountable. On the contrary, you may be rewarded for the effort. And by the way, if it's a real battle, let's say it's a lethal battle, you have to be real careful who you choose. If you're into this Japanese samurai fighting, right? And you think you'll gain a lot from fighting the world champion. You know, when I was a student at university, I used to do martial arts. I know it looks hard to believe, but you know, there was a time. And one day I was training with a world champion, like a fourth dan, amazing martial art, you know, like a world champion karate. A thin, skinny, wiry guy, looked like he couldn't, you know, injure a fly, but he was like a world champion. So we were like training, and he was like being very nice to me, you know. He wasn't hurting me. And then I made a fatal error. I said to him, look, could you just fight me, just for 2 minutes for real? He said, well, are you sure? I said, yeah, like, I can take it, you know. And he said, you sure want me to do that? I said, yeah. The next second, I found myself in a corner of the gym, like semi-conscious, you know, like a broken jaw. I don't know what hit me, I didn't even see it. I think it hit me when I blinked. You know, it's like, you know, it's come way. So you've got to be real careful when you choose, you know, that battle, right? And it's forbidden, actually, Jewishly, to wade into danger. Jewishly, you may not choose ordeals. Because when you choose a battle that you needn't have chosen, again, Talmud says like this, man's walking down the street, he comes to a road. The road forks. The one road takes him safely home. The other road takes him past a river where women are washing. They're not modestly covered. And he knows he shouldn't be looking at that sort of thing. I mean, a man who knows that he shouldn't look at that sort of thing, not a man who thinks that sort of thing is a mitzvah, right? So the man says to himself, look, I shouldn't be looking at women who are not properly covered. So let me take, what should I do? So he says to himself like this, if I take the safe road home, what do I gain? I simply get home. Let me take the road where the women are and not look. After all, you're created to use your free will, right? To withstand ordeals. The Talmud says if he takes the road where the women are and does not look, he's an evil man. Because he failed the test. Because the test wasn't will you look or not, the test was which road will you take. Not only did he fail the test, he failed even to realize he was being tested. Think about it, you come to a fork in the road. One road is safe. The other road has a poisonous cobra poised to strike. So you say, let's take the road with a snake and see if we can remember, idiot. You have a bottle of poison. So let's put the poison on the table next to the wine to see if we can remember to drink the poison. Jerk. Throw it out, lock it up, you don't play with fire. But if you take the safe road, you don't grow. But at Tzaddik, a righteous person says, God, just keep the test and keep the reward. Just don't let me do any damage in your world. That's why every morning we pray not to be tested. And by the way, if you take the road with your deal is, there's no way you can win. Either you look at the women and fall into taiva, which means lust, or you look away, then you fall into gaiva, pride. I managed. There's no way to win that battle. Yeah.
But if you're not tested, what is the point of living?
The point is that you fight like a tiger in the tests that you get given, not ones that you choose unnecessarily. Believe me, you'll be tested many times in life with moral ordeals that you, and each one of those will come with a guarantee that you can succeed, because he matches up his tests to the people that he handled. But when you choose once, there's no telling if you choose appropriate. So that's the principle of operating at your level of freedom. And one final point about this is that the point is not static, because when you operate right at one level, when you pick up weights in the gym, you build muscle, right? Then you have to pick up heavier weights. So when you exercise your spiritual will and you grow spiritually, then your next test is more difficult than the previous one. Otherwise, you'd outgrow free will, right? Imagine, for example, a young man goes out for lunch, crosses the street into the local seafood deli. Shrimp, crab, lobster boiled alive, but good. Snails, these days you can get peri-peri ants. Frog's legs, not good. But he likes that kind of food. Next door's a kosher deli, doesn't like that food. But for some reason he stands there thinking about a Jewish boy, kosher food, unkosher food desensitizes you spiritually. Stands there shaking and sweating for half an hour and eats a kosher lunch. Tremendous growth. A value has overcome a sensual desire. Next day the battle doesn't last as long. 2 or 3 weeks later finds himself eating kosher food out of habit. No more reward. No more battle. He's outgrown that test. Now God sends him a harder test. When you play the people in your tennis club and you can beat them easily, then you've got to play the national people. When you beat the national people, you've got to play international circuit, because you've outgrown yesterday's test, and therefore you're not standing. Now, Madesta says that the battle, the point of free will is like the front in a war. When two countries are at war, although the entire countries are at war, the pain and conflict is only felt on the front line. And as one country advances, conquered territory becomes quiet. You're not being tested there anymore. And as you become more mature spiritually, things that tempted you when you were a teenager, right, are no longer speaking to you, because you're grappling with more refined, sophisticated spiritual tests. Yeah.
So if you get to like a point where you're like tennis, for example,
yes.
you work your way up,
yes.
and let's say in the spiritual sense you
yes.
become the highest level you can make,
yes.
because it's limited, I guess.
Your question is, what happens when you outgrow free will altogether?
Yeah,
to
you
reach
don't
the
have
top.
free will anymore. Like it's Sonic.
Yeah. When you get to the level, when you get to that level, let me know. Okay. There's no limit. There's no limit, because no matter how great you are, you're being tested. That's why in Judaism, the greats of Torah history are slammed and criticized so harshly when they fail, because although they fell a millionth of a degree, at their level, that's, do you understand? Yeah.
Oh, I have
There is a technical point here, and that is, technically speaking, you could grow out of free will altogether. One of the great commentaries, the Meshech Chochmah, says that Moshe Rabbeinu, blew out the top completely. He lost his free will. He raised himself so high on the scale, he no longer could sin. That is possible.
I know, I think there was 3 people in the Torah that never committed a sin in their life.
That's true.
So
that does not mean they had no free will and could not sin. That just means they managed not to. 4 people. The Talmud says there were 4 people who never sinned ever.
When Moses loses his free will, does he essentially move in between that liminality between spirituality and animal?
He moves into the angelic zone.
And is angelic.
Yeah. For homework, you can figure out, how did he sin after that? He hit the rock instead of speaking to it? How did he make that mistake? He lost his free will. I'm not going to go into that now, but that is a possibility. And of course, on the bottom, there's also no free will. A child has no free will. Child, right? Not legally accountable. A person with temporal epilepsy. A person at gunpoint. A person kills at gunpoint. Somebody puts a gun to your head and says, kill him or I'll kill you. So Jewishly, you're not allowed to kill the person, you have to die. But if you do kill him, says the Rambam, you don't get punished. You had a gun held to your head. So there are areas, certain levels of addiction could take you out of free will. Let me show you how violently this disagrees with modern thought. Are you too tired to? You still got energy?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Show you how this disagrees with the world around us. Okay. A few more minutes. Stay with me. Give you an example. Stay with me. This is worth understanding. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist. Some time ago, he said to me, "Can you please discuss one of his patients with me?" I said, "Yeah." "Why do you want to talk to me? I'm not a psychiatrist." Here's the problem. He has a 21-year-old Jewish girl that he's dealing with who has a tremendous compulsion to steal candy in the supermarket. She's a rich girl, she has all the candy she wants at home, but she has a tremendous compulsion, right? Kleptomania. Walks in the supermarket, sees the candy. Tremendous urge to take the candy. Why is my friend speaking to me? Because she's now in court for the 10th time. And the judge is asking my friend to testify about her sanity. If he tells the judge that she's legally insane, she will be sent for psychiatric treatment. If he tells the judge that she's legally sane, This is a 10th offense, she's got to go to jail, and she may die there. You're talking about a sweet, naive girl in a South African jail, very dangerous, very rough. And he says to me, I cannot tell the judge that she's insane. Legal insanity means you're psychotically detached from reality. You don't know what, she knows what she's doing, she knows it's wrong, she's going for treatment, she often controls it. What am I to say? Think about this for a moment. If you say the girl is exempt and should be acquitted because she has kleptomania, meaning she has a tremendous compulsion, then who's accountable for any crime? If you find me doing something that you regard as immoral, you say, Tatz, why are you doing that? I say, you don't understand my urges. I get compulsions. And if you say, that makes sense, she's 100% guilty, her kleptomania is irrelevant. That's ridiculous. Obviously it's relevant. The reason you don't hang out in the supermarket most days stealing candy, right? No, it's because you don't have kleptomania. How are we going to judge this? Listen carefully. Do we allow all the coercive psychological variables, all the compulsions, all that makes your mind operate? Do we say those things are relevant or not? If you say they're relevant, forget about free will, forget about responsibility, forget about legal responsibility. If you say they're irrelevant, you're being a fool. You can see obviously those things are relevant. Do you see the dilemma? Another example. About 10 years ago, a young girl was jogging through Central Park in New York City. 5 or 6 young men from Harlem attacked her. Okay? From the ghetto in Harlem. They almost killed her, broke every bone in her body, although they never stole anything. When the police found them, they told the police they did it for fun. Sunday afternoon, nothing else to do, so they beat up this girl, almost killed her. Okay. The case came to trial in New York, and it caused a national uproar. Because the lawyers for the defense argued that these young men should be acquitted because they were brought up in a ghetto environment. They were so abandoned and brutalized and poverty-stricken and uneducated with no role models that what they did was appropriate to their sociological circumstances. Think about that. If you say, right, they're not guilty, they were brought up in a ghetto, there's such horrendous backgrounds, they're not guilty, then who's guilty for anything? Any criminal you find doing something, you'll say, it could be due to, you see this? And if you say, right, that's completely wrong, they're 100% guilty, the ghetto's irrelevant. That's stupid. Obviously it's relevant. The reason you don't hang out in the park is because you weren't brought up like that. Did you see the problem? So here's the question. In Judaism, do we say that all the coercive psychological variables that make you work, make you operate, your genes, your biochemistry, your social influences, are they relevant or not? If you say they're relevant, forget about free will and responsibility. And how can you deny that they're relevant? Do you see the question? Listen to the Jewish answer because it is so clear and in such conflict with the non-Jewish and secular model around us. And here it is. According to Jewish thinking, all of those variables, your genes, your chemistry, your background, what you did when you were 3 and what your mother said when you were 4, all those are 100% relevant. Do you know what they do? They set the point of freedom. If you're brought up in the ghetto, then instead of thinking like this, you think like that when it comes to violence. And that's not your fault. But what you do at that point is that. Girl walks into the store, sees the candy, right? Doesn't know the CCTV is watching her. Right? Is this her fault, the situation? No. She has kleptomania. But when she takes the candy and walks out, she's guilty. What you do at your point of order, is this clear?
Yes.
Fellow stands in the park, right? Harlem guys, girl joke. One guy says to the one, hey dude, or whatever they say. The other guy says, yeah man. Let's go beat that girl. And the other guy says, yeah, cool. Is that their fault? No. That's how you think when you're brought up in such violent circumstances. But when they walk over and do it, knowing they wouldn't like having their bones broken with a piece of lead piping, they're 100% guilty. Is this clear? What you're dealing with is not your fault. But how you deal with it is up to you. Yeah.
So like earlier you referred to like addictions as
Yes.
Like certain instances
Yes.
of addictions as
Yes.
they don't have free will.
Well,
So why wouldn't
So addictions like this. Let's say that a person who's not addicted to cigarette smoking is functioning here, right? A person with an addiction has his point of ordeal shifted. He's dealing with something I'm not dealing with. I may not even understand his difficulty in that area. But he's grappling with that issue. Provided it remains within the zone of free will, right? He has an addiction, which means it's tremendous compulsion. Addiction doesn't mean, by the way, that you have no... Addiction doesn't mean the cigarette does this and you can't get out of its way. Addiction just means that you have more of an urge and it's more difficult to resist. I've seen people resist heroin and almost die, as much worse than cigarettes. Doesn't mean they lose their free will. But of course it may get so bad that you lose your free will, in which case you wouldn't be accountable. You may be accountable for getting into that situation in the first place. And sometimes an external judgment cannot be made. You don't know how difficult it is for that person.
The Bechira point is whether you give like the last hit on the head,
Yeah.
and that you. So can you hold? How do you know how accountable you have to hold it?
That's a good question. How do you know how to hold a person accountable? In a legal sense, very often it's impossible. Give you an example. A couple of years ago in England, 2 children killed a baby. Two boys, 10 and 11-year-old boys, killed a baby. The court had a very difficult time trying to decide whether those children were old enough to be accountable or not. How old do you have to be to be accountable for your actions in Judaism? 13 if you're a boy, 12 if you're a girl. How old do you have to be in Judaism if you're a non-Jew? What does Jewish law say about the age of responsibility for non-Jews?
7.
No. When you're old enough. How old is that? Question of judgment. Not easy. And very often courts have a very difficult time making that call. But the principle is clear, right? Even though, not only that, sometimes you don't even know what you're capable of doing. Sometimes only the pressure of a test shows you what you're capable of. You weren't even aware about that before. Up to now, what I said is, I think, logical. No? You can see that? But here's where it gets difficult. Let's put the microscope on the point of freedom. Let's ask, why do people choose what they choose? Here's the girl in the store with a candy, CCTV watching her, managers watching the screen. Next to him sits the psychologist. The girl looks around, eventually takes the candy and walks out. Manager says to his friend, why did she do that? Why did she make that choice? Why did she make that choice? What's the answer? Why do you choose what you choose? That's why you allowed yourself to do it. But why did you do it? There's no answer to that question. Any answer is the denial of free will. She stole the candy because when she was 3 years old, it's her mother's fault. The answer is, she chose. And that's very mysterious. It's something that is not caused by anything else. According to Kabbalah, are we allowed to mention Kabbalah?
Yeah.
According to Kabbalah, this is where free will sits. You know, when a child is born, the skull is open. You know that? When a baby is born, you can feel the brain pulsate. When I examine a newborn child, the first thing I feel is the brain, where there's no bone. Right? You know that, the fontanelle. This is where a man wears tefillin, is to reopen that connection. Right? It's to reopen that connection that the bone has closed. This place here in Hebrew, in Kabbalah, is called Ratzon. Ratzon means will. The place of will, desire. Free will, will. The word Ratzon in Hebrew has the same numerical equivalent as the word Makor, meaning a source. And Shmuel, Hashem's name, God's name as well. A source is a point of origin. You can never ask for the point of origin of a point of origin. It doesn't make sense. Is this clear? Mm-hmm. Imagine a river flowing, right? Why is the water flowing here? Because it flowed from here. Why is the water flowing from here? But you can never ask that about the source. That's where it begins. Free will is where you begin. You can never ask me, why did you choose that? Because if you could answer that question, I wouldn't be free. That would be the reason. Free will means you decide because you decide. It's a very mysterious thing. And let me finish with this. This means that very weird things come out of this place. Total paradoxes. Without going into all the Kabbalistic background, I'll just give you one. Free will means that you can face an ordeal in which one option attracts you very powerfully and one option attracts you very weakly. And free will means you will choose which one?
Either one.
Either one. Metal object, strong magnet, weak magnet. Metal object towards a strong magnet. Human being, strong motivation, weak motivation. Human being moves towards the whichever one you choose. If you always move towards a strong motivation, that will be denial of free will. Can you see that? Which means, weirdly, you can have a very powerful attraction in one direction, a pathetic, childish, trivial one in the other direction, and you can move towards the childish attraction. Is that weird? I see doubtful faces. Let me prove it to you. I will give you a scenario where a person faces a very powerful attraction, something ridiculously childish, and I'll show you people taking the trivial attraction. Are you ready? Ever tried dieting? Here's how it works. On the one hand, you have the motivation of how you want to be, how you want to look. Next summer on the kosher beach, like relationships and self-image, would you call that a powerful motivation? Would you?
Yes.
On the other hand, you've got this little chocolate wedge thing with a bit of cream and like a cherry. 10 seconds of pleasure during which you'll feel like an idiot. You're talking about a massive life motivation against 10 seconds of ridiculous pleasure. And a minute later, you're looking at a plate that is licked clean. There's like not even a lick of chocolate. How do people do it? How do people do it? You're talking about seconds of pleasure during which you'll feel like an idiot against a life goal. How thick can you be? You know, when I was a junior intern in surgery, once I had a patient with Berger's disease in the hospital where I was working. You know that Berger's disease is an exquisite genetic susceptibility to nicotine in cigarette smoke. People who have this disease, they smoke, their blood vessels close down. First their fingers fall off, then their hands fall off. Okay, multiple amputations. There's not one recorded case in a non-smoker. They stop smoking, the disease stops. They carry on smoking, their body falls apart. This man was a 45-year-old, highly intelligent engineer. He came into our ward with a blue leg. The arteries supplying his leg had been closing down. He had 4 black toes we had to cut off that day. And the man knew that if he carried on smoking, we'd cut his leg off. He knew more about the disease than we did. He carried on smoking, and 3 weeks later, we did an above-knee amputation. Okay. The next time I saw him, I was a senior intern in surgery, and I noticed them wheeling him down the hospital corridor in a wheelchair with no legs, smoking, on his way to losing an arm. You know, I have a colleague in New York, he told me, a vascular surgeon. He had a patient like this, and he lost his second arm. He had them rig up some wire on the wheelchair so he could carry on smoking. Wow. So let's just get the choice clear. Man stands there with a cigarette and a leg, and he says to himself, cigarette, leg. Let's get the choice clear, right? Cigarette, leg. Cigarette, leg. Know where the cigarette, live, leg, man, husband, father, walk, leg. Or 30 seconds of pleasure during which you'll feel the cold hand of death. How could you get that wrong? The answer is, you choose. It's up to you. Right? I'll give you an example. I'll finish with this. You know, you go swimming in South Africa, where I come from. There's one beach which is ridiculously cold. Right? In Cape Town, there are 2 beaches. The water is like dangerously cold. You go for a swim, you walk in, you put your foot in, 2 toes fall off right away. That's ridiculous. That's swim. But you turn around, all your friends are watching you. You came a long way for this swim. You keep going like an ankle cracks, you know. Eventually kneecap disintegrates, you know that feeling. Eventually you get to a point where the water's more or less around here, and after that there's no going slow, just too painful. So you say to yourself, I'm just going to go under that water. And then you say, I'm just getting out of here. Because what happens in free will is you sit in this position, and both sides make their presentations. And during the battle of presentations, the answer, the response is paralysis. The one side says, try me, and you fantasize. Then the other side, how about me? And it can take a long time. And eventually you open the gate to whichever one you choose. And when it gets in, you stand there and you say, just go into that water, you probably won't die. And then you say, just get out of here. And the response is, you don't go up and down, up and down. You stand there, you take a long time. And sooner or later, you just go down. And people can commit suicide there. Doesn't matter what you choose, it's up to you. If you choose the right one, you let it in. If you choose the wrong one, you allow yourself an instant of temporary insanity. That's what the Talmud calls rushtus. And in that moment of insanity, you do it, and a second later the smoke clears and the dust settles, and you say, what have I done? How could I do that? Can't believe it. Did it again. But you did it.